The Canadian Reformed churches consists, by and large, mostly, or at least initially, from immigrants that came from the Netherlands and that established themselves in Canada. Initially, they joined the Christian Reformed churches in the various places where they immigrated and tried to establish a sister church relationship with the churches they came from in the Netherlands, which had just gone during the Second World War through a secession which is called the Liberation. So the immigrants that came to Canada, in spite of the fact that they had left the, let's say, the CRC in the Netherlands, they still joined the CRC in Canada and urged the CRC Federation to establish a sister church relationship with the liberated churches in the Netherlands. But that fell through. That did not materialize. They were not really interested in making any changes or familiarizing themselves with what happened during the Second World War. So for that reason, those immigrants that came from the liberated churches in the Netherlands established themselves as local congregations, and they called themselves the Canadian Reformed Churches. That was in around 1951, 52, 53. That's when the first ones came and the first congregations were established. So they established themselves, but even though they did, let's say, establish themselves as independent congregations, they still reached out to the Christian Reformed churches in Canada to still pursue church unity with them according to the command of the Lord and the prayer of our Savior. So they did that with appeals to these churches in 1978 and or 73 and 1978, but also those appeals fell on deaf ears. So in the meantime, also within the CRC, there were developments of concern about liberalism, concerns also about deviation from doctrine in the 1970s. And as you perhaps know, in the Christian Reformed churches, there also started to develop a secession. In 1980, the Orthodox Christian Reformed churches seceded, and then in 1990, what now are called the United Reformed Churches seceded on developments such as the teachings regarding the Canons of Dort, the doctrine of reprobation, Harry Boer. There were developments in the Christian Reformed Church with Alan Verhey on the issues of Genesis 1 through 11. And then in the course of time, there were the issues of women office bearers, deacons, elders, even ministers. So in the 1980s, 1990s, among the Christian Reformed churches, the one after the other seceded. They at first established an alliance of Christian Reformed or United Reformed churches, and eventually established a federation. In that whole process, I've been privileged to be part of that, because I am one of the coordinators of church unity in the Canadian Reformed churches. So ever since, I would say, I moved to Ontario from Manitoba, which was in 1989, I've been involved with church unity, and it just so happens that this coming November the 14th, Reverend Buckenstein and myself, we will be attending a meeting of representatives of our churches in Atlanta, Georgia, to pursue this unity with the Canadian Reformed churches and the United Reformed churches. We were well on our way at the time with Reverend Bowers, Reverend Steenstra, Reverend Vellinga being the United Reformed representatives, and Dr. Jack de Jong and myself, and one of the elders being the delegates from our churches, and we established an agreement of cooperation, of merger around 2001, expecting to merger at that time, but already then we felt and we noticed among the United Reformed Churches that there was perhaps a need for time to become acquainted more. Not so much among the Canadian churches, also of the URC, but also and especially among the American churches. And yeah, over the past 10 years, even though we have worked very hard in establishing the basis for such a merger, there were 3 areas in which we really had to grow together. First of all, in order for a merger to be feasible, you need a church order in which you agree to live together by this way of ordering church life, which is very confessional, very scriptural, and that committee has developed a church order that could possibly be finalized and adopted or shelved at the next synod of the URC, which will be in New Jersey. But that is only one. They were the most advanced in their development of an agreeable product, namely a joint church order. Then there was also a committee that worked together on a church book, which is, a book of praise, a psalter, hymnal, whatever you call it. That committee worked very hard as well and initially established a very great relationship. But then I think Synod Cherryville decided that the United Reformed Churches should pursue its own way in a church book and should pursue also its own selection of psalms and hymns, and they are still working hard on that, and as a result of it enjoying some trouble about that. But we as Canadian Reformed Churches also continue to upgrade and modernize and improve on our book of praise, and we too are about to adopt at our next synod in 2013 a book of praise that will hopefully serve us for I don't know how long. The third issue was somewhat more divisive, and that is our theological education. In the history of the Christian Reformed Churches, Grand Rapids Seminary caused a lot of difficulty, a lot of deviation, liberalism in the Christian Reformed Churches. So among the United Reformed Churches, there has grown an aversion of sorts against a federational seminary. I think that's really too bad, because a federational seminary is really the best form of training your own ministers and of producing servants that all are, let's say, on the same page. A uniformity in preaching and teaching as a result of a unified training. I'm afraid that the United Reformed Churches, by having this aversion to a theological seminary of the Federation, that they somewhat throw out the baby with the bathwater. A federational seminary is a seminary of the churches for the churches. That's the principle that we have derived from 2 Timothy 2 verse 2, namely that you pass on this holy deposit, that doctrine, that teaching, that tradition from one generation to the next, and do that indeed by men who are well trained and well versed in the scriptures and are reliable teachers. In the United Reformed Churches, ministers are coming from different backgrounds, different seminaries. And, those seminaries may still be faithful as they are, but there are, let's say, different emphases, different characteristics of these seminaries. So the uniformity, that be the unity among ministers in the United Reformed Churches, is not as great as what you would have if they would come from a federational seminary. So our churches, having been blessed extremely well by a federational seminary which has been in operation for about since 1968, so for about 45 years, that seminary has produced many, many ministers and has created a uniformity and unity of preaching and teaching among our churches, which is a great blessing, which we enjoy all the time. So that's the issue that has kind of made us stall the process, drift apart a bit, and now we have to get the cart back on the rails. And that's really the purpose of the meeting, which Reverend Buchenstein and myself will be in Atlanta, Georgia on November the 14th and the 15th. So that's the only issue that we may see as a real issue that could divide us, but whether it should be weighty enough to keep us separate, that's a question that needs to be discussed. However, having said that, as churches, we are one in doctrine, one in confessions, one in pursuit of worship. In every way, we feel very much united with the United Reformed Churches. To illustrate that, I've been exchanging pulpit with ministers of the United Reformed Churches in my area, Reverend Limas in Nobleton, Reverend Lankeet in Toronto, Reverend Ansel Merwin in Oromadonte. They regularly exchange. We meet each other every month in a ministerial, and Eric Pennings, the missionary, Brother Zekveld, the missionary, they are all part of that group of ministers that work together very closely in our area. And among the Canadian churches, United Reformed and Canadian Reformed, there is a growing coherence, a growing unity that erases pretty much any difference or distinction between Canadian Reformed and United Reformed churches. Be that as it may, with the American churches, of course, that is somewhat different, because we have 52 Canadian Reformed churches, of which only 3 are American Reformed, or 4. Denver, Grand Rapids, Bluebell, Philadelphia, and Linden, Washington. So there is a major presence in Canada of the Canadian Reformed churches, and very few in the American states. So the American churches are simply not acquainted with our Canadian Reformed churches, and therefore are dragging their heels, want to become acquainted first, but also to be honest and to keep it balanced, have their own issues to work out as United Reformed churches. It is a federation of churches, but the backgrounds, the cultures, the history of local churches differ so much that even amongst themselves that coherence is not there as much as we enjoy in Canada in that sense. Just to bring our Canadian Reformed churches somewhat closer to you as well, we also are sister church with the RCUS. So from my very beginning, 27 years ago as minister in the Canadian Reformed churches in Winnipeg, Manitoba, I remember vividly the meetings that we had in Dakota, North Dakota. Reverend Sims was one of the names that come to mind. I'm getting older, so the other name escapes me, but there were 2 ministers that we met regularly, and the Church of Carmen, which is close to Winnipeg, was the organizing church for our contact with the Reformed Church of the U.S. So our relationship with the RCUS goes back just as far. So in that sense, yes, you are United Reformed, you are originally RCUS. In either way, we love you dearly, we know you very much, and we feel very, very comfortable in being in your midst.